The water had barely receded. The bodies of the drowned world still lay beneath the mud, and yet something survived that should have been destroyed forever. Welcome back to Celestial Secrets. Tonight we go deeper, much deeper than most channels will ever dare to take you. You already know the name Enoch. You already know he was the man who walked with God and simply vanished. No death, no tomb, no grave, just gone. And you know the book that bears his name was ripped from Scripture, buried, condemned, and silenced for over 1,000 years. But here is what they never finished telling you. The Book of Enoch didn't end with the flood. The secrets it contained didn't drown with the giants. In fact, the most dangerous parts of Enoch's vision, the parts that made church councils sweat, those parts were about what comes after. About a world that looks exactly like ours. About a time that feels uncomfortably familiar. So the real question isn't why they banned the Book of Enoch. The real question is why they kept banning it. Century after century, council after council. Even after the flood was supposed to have washed the slate clean, the suppression continued. Why would you need to keep hiding something if it was already buried under the ocean? To understand what they were hiding, we have to go back to the moment the Book of Enoch was written, or rather, the moment it was remembered. Enoch lived 7 generations after Adam. The Bible calls him a man who walked with God. But the text that carries his name describes something far more terrifying and far more magnificent than a simple walk through a garden. Enoch was taken, transported, lifted through layers of heaven and shown things that human eyes were never meant to see. He witnessed the thrones of angels, the machinery of the cosmos, the names of stars, the architecture of time itself, and he wrote it all down. For centuries, this book was treated as sacred. Early Jewish communities revered it. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947 in caves near Qumran, contained more fragments of the Book of Enoch than almost any other text. Think about that. In those ancient caves, whoever hid those scrolls considered Enoch important enough to preserve multiple copies. These were not careless people. They were deliberate. They knew something might be coming, something that would try to erase this knowledge, and erase it they did. By the 4th century, the Book of Enoch had been formally removed from the biblical canon. Church fathers, who once quoted it, freely suddenly reversed course. Hilary of Poitiers, Jerome, Augustine, men who shaped the foundation of Western Christianity, all quietly stepped back from the book they had once acknowledged. No dramatic announcement, no public burning, just a slow, deliberate erasure, like watching someone disappear from a photograph. But here is where the story takes a turn that most people completely miss. The Book of Enoch isn't one book, it's 5. Scholars call them 5 distinct sections: the Book of the Watchers, the Book of Parables, the Astronomical Book, the Book of Dream Visions, and the Epistle of Enoch. Each one contains a different layer of forbidden knowledge, and the deepest layers, the ones scholars spend entire careers trying to decode, those layers aren't about the past at all. The section called the Book of Parables is particularly strange. It speaks of a figure Enoch calls the Son of Man, a being who existed before creation, who sits beside God, who will one day judge the kings of the earth and shake the foundations of power. Early Christians reading this text would have recognized the language immediately. It mirrors the language used to describe Jesus in the Gospels of Matthew and John, almost word for word. Some scholars believe the Gospel writers were directly quoting from Enoch. Others believe Enoch was quoting from a prophecy even older than his own lifetime. And then there are those who raise a much more uncomfortable possibility, that the figure described in the Book of Enoch and the figure described in the New Testament are not the same being at all. That suggestion alone was enough to make it dangerous. But the flood. We need to talk about the flood because this is where the second layer of suppression begins. Most people know the Enoch story as a prequel to Noah. The Watchers descend. They corrupt humanity. God sends the flood to destroy what they created. End of story. Clean reset. Good wins. But the Book of Enoch, particularly in its later sections, tells you something that completely unsettles that clean ending. The evil that caused the flood was not destroyed by the flood. It was transformed. The giants, the Nephilim, were killed. Their bodies drowned. But Enoch records something that the canonical Bible leaves completely silent. The spirits of the giants did not die. They became something else, something that wanders the earth, searching for physical bodies to inhabit, seeking to corrupt what they can no longer physically destroy. Ancient readers knew exactly what to call these entities. The Book of Enoch gives them a name and a purpose and a terrifying degree of intelligence. And the flood, for all its catastrophic power, did nothing to stop them. This is the truth they needed buried, not the story of the Watchers coming down. That story was already in Genesis, vague enough to be dismissed. What needed to be erased was the continuation. The part that said the problem wasn't solved, the part that implied the world you are living in right now is still operating under the shadow of what those Watchers set in motion. Think about what that means for a moment. If the flood was the solution, and the solution didn't work, then what does that say about every religious and political institution that has built its authority on the promise of divine protection and spiritual safety? What does it say about the idea that the ancient corruption was a closed chapter? The Book of Enoch answers those questions in a way that makes power very, very uncomfortable. Now here is where the story becomes stranger still. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church never abandoned the Book of Enoch. While Rome was scrubbing it from its libraries, the Ethiopian Church kept it, preserved it, taught from it, called it sacred, and not just sacred in a peripheral sense. In Ethiopia, the Book of Enoch is considered part of the full biblical canon to this day. The only reason we have a complete surviving version of the text is because of Ethiopia. An entire civilization decided that this knowledge was worth protecting, while the rest of the world decided it was worth destroying. Ask yourself why one branch of ancient Christianity fought so hard to keep something that another branch fought equally hard to eliminate. That tension has never been resolved. It is still alive. And then there are the chapters that even the scholars who study Enoch seem reluctant to spend too much time discussing. The astronomical book, sometimes called 1st Enoch 72 through 82, describes the movements of the sun, moon, and stars with a precision that should not have been possible for a Bronze Age writer. It describes a 364-day solar calendar that aligns with calendar systems found in other ancient cultures, completely disconnected from the Hebrew world. It describes the angels assigned to specific stars and constellations, their names, their functions, their relationship to events on Earth. And tucked inside this seemingly astronomical text is a detail so strange that when modern researchers first encountered it, several of them quietly set it aside and didn't publish their findings for years. Enoch describes certain celestial bodies that do not follow the rules of the other celestial bodies. Bodies that move differently, that appear and disappear, that are guided not by natural law but by the will of specific angelic intelligences, ancient astronomy, or something else entirely. The question of what Enoch actually saw and how he saw it has become one of the most quietly controversial debates in academic theology. Because if Enoch was simply a religious poet, writing metaphorical visions, then the text can be safely categorized and shelved. But if Enoch was recording actual experiences, actual encounters, then the categories we use to separate religion from something else entirely begin to blur in ways that make everyone uncomfortable. Theologians don't want to follow that thread. Scientists don't want to touch it. And the people in the middle, the ones willing to ask the question without a predetermined answer, they tend to find themselves standing very alone. There is one more piece of this that we cannot walk past. In the closing sections of the Book of Enoch, in the letters and visions attributed to him near the end of the text, Enoch writes something that has haunted scholars for generations. He writes directly to a generation that is not his own. He says explicitly that his words are not for the people of his time. They are preserved for a future generation, a generation that will live at a very specific moment in history. A moment characterized by particular signs, particular corruptions, particular behaviors among those in power. He describes this generation in detail, and the detail is unsettling not because it sounds like ancient history. It is unsettling because it sounds like a description written last week. Whether that is prophetic genius, theological coincidence, or something that defies both categories entirely, that is a question this channel will leave in your hands, because that is the nature of what was buried in the Book of Enoch. It doesn't give you peace. It doesn't tie things neatly together. It opens a door and then it stands back and waits. It found its way through the flood, through the councils, through the centuries of silence. It survived Ethiopia when Rome tried to kill it. It survived the desert caves of Qumran when the world forgot it existed. It survived every attempt to reduce it to a footnote. And now it's here, in front of you, on a screen, in the middle of the night. Maybe Enoch always knew it would find you eventually. Maybe that was the plan all along. The only question left, the one that should keep you awake, is what exactly he wanted you to do once it did.